Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's Tuesday, September the 2nd, the beginning of phase 2 of the Keir era. My name's Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Happy 63rd birthday, Keir. Recess is a distant memory. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the early morning podcast that gives you everything you need for the day ahead in British politics in around 20 minutes.
And today, the shakedown after Keir Starmer's mini shuffle with the first cabinet meeting in a slightly shell-shocked Downing Street after that day of the long knives. The government reveals the legislation setting out how it's to change sentencing policy to deal with the fact that it's running out of prison spaces. And we get the new Green Party leader or leaders announced at 11 a.m. Will that party go in a much more eco-populist direction? And ministers launch a consultation to ban high caffeine drinks for the under 16s. But what about the podcast hosts?
Yeah, you have to be a fan of high caffeine drinks to be part of the Politics of Sam and Anne's team. Here's a tale for you, Anne. Did you know that there was a Sky News boss, Sky News editor, whose girlfriend used to find cans of Monster, the high caffeine drink, in the shower in the mornings, because that's how he used to rev himself up for the day. And he would leave them there in the shower for her when he departed and when she got up hours later.
All I have to add to this, as I tried to be a bit healthy in the summer and saw a nutritionist, was that you're not supposed to have caffeine for an hour and a half after getting up in the morning. And I did point out that this should maybe have an exemption clause for people who do very early podcasts about politics.
That sounds inhuman, given what we have to do. Right, we've also, I've actually got another piece that's running pretty prominently on Sky today. As part of this series about why we just don't get growth in this country. Today, you can see me visiting flats, which are completely finished and ready to go, but lying empty because they haven't had final approval from the government's own safety regulator, which is a growing backlog and just can't give out the approvals on time that it wants. Our minister's doing enough. The building safety regulator is up before a select committee this morning.
Interesting, that one. And yesterday saw those big announcements that we trailed from the Home Secretary about asylum and immigration, international students being warned not to overstay their welcome, getting personal letters telling them not to do that, migrants temporarily banned from bringing family members for 2 years, Keir Starmer announcing he wants to close asylum hotels earlier than 2029 if he can pull that off, confirming plans to tighten the way also that judges will have to interpret the ECHR, particularly Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, but not pulling out of the ECHR. Whew. Okay, so Yvette Cooper is doing the morning round, meaning that the government is quite happy to talk about this for another day. And for the Tories, Kemi Badenoch backs further away from net zero at a speech at the Society of Petroleum Engineers Offshore Europe conference in Aberdeen, and she will be shilling for the extraction of more oil and gas from the North Sea.
Let's hope it's a little bit drier than the pictures of her absolutely sodden under an umbrella yesterday when she gave her first round of interviews of the new term. But let's start with that fallout from the mini shuffle. We told you this time yesterday morning that Tim Allen was coming into Downing Street, and we were right. He did. He's got the job of new executive director of communications. One day I want to be executive deputy political editor, Anne. But no one saw Darren Jones coming in as a Mr. Fix-It. Now, in a moment, I understand you've got this sort of inside story of how some of this all ended up shaking down and happening, and how some of the current team ended up leaving. And apparently how you had a walk-on part. Sorry, I should redo that with less surprise in my voice, but I'm not going to. But first, you want to just give me an overview of what we just witnessed.
Yeah, the consequences of that day of the long knives and now big opportunities for those who got lucky is sinking in. And the questions that it's raised, Sam, have really at heart become about the relationship between number 10 and number 11, and so between Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. So to take it back to the drawing board here, we get that new executive head of communications in the return of Tim Allen to Downing Street after many decades, having, of course, served alongside Alistair Campbell under Tony Blair. and the accompanying departure of James Lyons. It's definitely a one in, one out setup there when it comes to getting one super Blairite in Tim Allen, and out for Liz Lloyd, the short lived head of delivery and innovations. And this is insider baseball, yes, but it's also a sign of a concern that the delivery and the messages haven't been working well. So a lot of people saying overnight this is the ultimate insider baseball. This is really only for the nerds of the number 10 org chart. I take a different view. I think it really matters. And I think when you come to write the history of governments, what looks like these somewhat trivial professional arrangements around the Prime Minister and Chancellor actually turn out to tell a much deeper story of dysfunction.
That's right. And I think it's important that you bring it back to the economics, bluntly, Anne, as you just did, because what's happened is we've moved away from the first phase where my sense was that certainly initially, perhaps in her shadow chancellor days, Rachel Reeves wasn't thrilled at the idea of there being competing economic voices in the prime minister's ear. And if things have got more and more difficult and the challenges of government have got bigger, and of course the size of that black hole has got bigger, I think Rachel Reeves has shifted and is, I think, pretty comfortable to socialise the problem. And what I mean by that is that the sort of big point of yesterday is there are suddenly a lot more economic brains entering number 10 today. So you've got the new economic advisor, Minouche Shafiq. You've got Daniel Smith as the new principal private secretary, who is basically the lead civil servant who did oversee the budget. And of course, you've got Darren Jones, who we'll talk about in a moment, all with the blessing, we are explicitly told, of Rachel Reeves. I'm not sure that's what it would have felt like 18 months ago. But if anybody's nose is out of joint, it's that there are big new figures in number 10 with a lot of power. Just don't call them the deputy prime minister in the form of Darren Jones. But I don't think this is right now going to be felt like a challenge to Rachel Reeves in the Treasury. I think she'll be quite pleased that they are spreading the kind of economic brain power across the two buildings in a way that I wonder whether it wouldn't be quite so true before the election, when Rachel Reeves was notoriously secretive about her plans and what she was going to do. And in that first spending review, where she was very sort of robust and defensive and kind of, kept very tight her plans. This is a different approach. And I think that's because of the scale of the problem. Now, also, sort of deep surgery yesterday on the communications and policy side. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the magic of what happened? Because I think you've got the inside skinny.
Well, yes. And I think what happened here, Sam, was kicked off by the search in the summer, which was well known around communications and the high end of communications and public affairs folk in London, for someone to lead the government's joined up communications mission, and that a job was basically on the block for that. Previous incumbent was leaving it, and there ended up being three lead candidates. One of them was Tim Allen, who had founded Portland Communications and gone on to become an investor in other communications businesses successfully for the past few years, but still very involved with Labour politics, and particularly at the pro-growth, more pro-business end of Labour. David Dinsmore, a grand fromage from News UK and former editor of Sun Titles, and also Ed Williams, the rather smooth head of Edelman in Europe, who was also approached but decided not to go ahead. And this search kicked off a real turf war, because James Lyons was in post as head of strategic communications. He'd been working across the year very closely with Morgan McSweeney, trying to enhance the Prime Minister's grip on message and running the communications operation. And I hear that he was concerned about the scope of this new head of comms across government role, and wanted it made very clear that the PM's personal communications and that number 10 in general should really be bracketed out of that. So this rolls through the process. Keir Starmer met both Tim Allen and David Dinsmore. David Dinsmore got the job. He starts in a couple of months. And that's largely, I think, boiling down a maze of press officers and communications muddle across many departments, bringing in more AI, slimming down an unwieldy government operation, etc. But it seemed to introduce or reintroduce Tim Allen to the Prime Minister. It caught his eye in a positive way. So I think this job and the idea of Tim Allen coming in and then James Lyons deciding to go as a result, or being effectively realizing they had to go as a result, then followed. My only walk-on part in this, since you were kind enough to mention my bit of gossip on the podcast, was that I just went into number 10 and I saw James Lyons in what turned out to be the middle of all of this. But of course, I didn't know it at the time. And I did feel that for someone I've seen be very focused, can be very positive, the mojo was a little bit off. And I thought there was a generally slightly angsty mood, defensive mood across communications. And I think anyone who's been caught up in one of these reshuffles at work and the boss maybe having an eye on someone else that they've taken a fancy to, that's very understandable. But it was clearly, I think, the beginning of the end. And the fallout was, of course, Dinsmore got the government job, and Starmer, impressed by Tim Allen, saw something in his pitch and said, look, why don't you come over to me? And so now the two of them have jobs and James Lyons is looking elsewhere.
Well, let's see whether it works. It's very easy in politics to blame the communications teams. There's only so much you can do. Tim Allen undoubtedly has an extraordinary track record, but I think the reality of the challenges that this government faces are bigger. Whether it's the black hole, the asylum challenge, or what really are the priorities. So that will unfold. I just want to talk about what I think is the biggest thing in this mini shuffle, and that's Darren Jones. So what Keir Starmer has done is he has appointed a personal Mr. Fix-It in the form of somebody who was until yesterday a mid-ranking minister, the number 2 in the Treasury, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Darren Jones, who is a incredibly articulate and I think impressive, if occasionally combative, sort of up-and-coming rising star, maybe even one-day leader. Let's give him that. Let's tar him with that horror. And Keir Starmer, with Rachel Reeves' blessing, we are briefed, has been nicked from number 11 and put in number 10. So he was Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He is now Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, with a very specific brief that he gets to poke his nose in every other cabinet minister's business. Now, the way it was explained to me is that that's exactly what Darren Jones did during the spending review. He went line by line, supposedly, through every single item of spending. And then so he knows where the financial and fiscal bodies are buried. He has his own view on whether cabinet ministers' assumptions are right. He'll know where you can make savings and where you can't. And effectively what he will do is tell the Prime Minister whether to believe cabinet ministers or not. He'll help the ones that he agrees with, and presumably where he disagrees, he won't be shy of telling Keir Starmer that either. Now, we have never had a Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. We have never had a very senior cabinet minister sitting with an office alongside the Prime Minister in number 10, double-checking the homework of other cabinet ministers. I think the closest you can get to is Joe Johnson in the cabinet office a few years ago, Boris Johnson's brother. But all of that doesn't really match what we've got now. And I think, Anne, there's probably a reason for that, because I think what has been set up here is a role that, however impressive and talented, and I think Darren Jones is, he's a very good communicator. We'll hear a lot of him on the airwaves. But this is a role where we have one cabinet minister who is sort of structurally set up to clash with the others. And he's already unpopular in some parts of the cabinet for the way that he handled the spending review. So we will see whether this delivers. And then one final thought. I don't know about you, Anne, but I would never have put Darren Jones as an ideological soulmate of the Prime Minister. Darren much more reformy. In another era, you would call him Blairite. Obviously, that's out of fashion, even though they all seem to be streaming back to number 10. Sort of would be pushing on, will be pushing on things like welfare reform and special educational needs reform. That doesn't feel to me, insofar as we know the politics of Keir Starmer, who feels like a much softer left figure, doesn't feel like him. So if Keir Starmer is ever so slightly looking to Darren Jones for a bit more of the vision thing, it's not the vision that I would have put Keir Starmer down as sharing explicitly as well.
Do you think, though, that Keir Starmer is changing? That the office is reshaping the Prime Minister's view? Because it is true, we probably fall into it as well, talking about him as a bit of a soft left figure who's sort of moved a bit rightwards in the pragmatic demands of office. But it may well be that he now sees his future as depending on moving further in that direction, and hence the appointment there of Darren Jones, as the playbook puts it this morning. DJ got us falling in love. You young people will know that one. I was about to say last night, a DJ saved my life, because that shows my generation. But there is that sense of call for Mr. Jones, and I think you're right to poke around in the area of why is that. So I was talking to a very senior Tory yesterday who'd often had to man mark Darren Jones in various incarnations. And he did praise him, Sam, for his grasp of detail. As you say, going through every line of budgets. He said he could really, if you work him in the night, he could answer questions about that. Spending in public services. He probably could direct the Prime Minister to say, look, here are the choices more clearly that you've got to make. And hence this line that's coming out of number 10 about the Prime Minister needing a more direct line of sight. Now, my Tory source also said Darren Jones isn't always lovable. He can be flinty, he can be brusque, he can be a bit high-handed, but he did say he knows his stuff. He is all across the detail. And the question is, why does Starmer feel that he needs that granular source of information? You pointed out there are other big changes on his team to beef up his economic muscle. I'm trying to be a bit fair, because I think everybody is a critic when it comes to these reshuffles. Could it be that we've said quite often on this podcast and elsewhere that Keir Starmer doesn't look like he's got a confident grip on his own budgets, on his economic message? And then when he appoints people to strengthen the support network around him, we're like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? It's a power grab. Isn't he really trying to answer a question and address one of his own weaknesses?
I think we're basically in violent agreement, and I don't disagree that Darren Jones is, across the detail. His ability to explain the spending review to me on spending review day, when I presented him with the AI equivalent, was incredibly impressive. He could go through the trade-offs and the challenges in every department at the drop of a hat in front of a screen. Big tick, because I don't even think his boss, Rachel Reeves, his former boss, Rachel Reeves, could do it with anything like the Elan. The question is, Keir Starmer is going to be continually asked to choose between Darren and Cabinet Minister X or Cabinet Minister Y. I think that's tricky. And where I do diverge is maybe Keir Starmer has moved to the right, but I just don't know. He seemed to lean that way on migration earlier in the year with the Island of Strangers comment. Then he disavowed it. I am told that in meetings, wherever he's asked to do a spending choice between two things, because the budgets are tight, he comes back and asks for both. And people who see him up close describe him as soft and a soft left character, because that's what they see behind closed doors. So I don't know. We're speculating a little bit on meetings that we're not directly sitting in, but from the accounts that I have, I'm still unclear exactly of the nature of the Prime Minister's politics.
But don't you think phase two, this immortal phrase that's now crept into the description of this government, is really signalling something like a shift? Because if it doesn't signal a shift, and we don't see a more focused, perhaps more decisive, in some ways much tougher Keir Starmer, there won't be any point in having phase two. There might not well be a phase three.
Maybe, but I want to call out one thing. Keir Starmer said yesterday this is about delivery, delivery, delivery. We are not. We are not in the delivery phase of this government. We are still in the big choices that I don't know where we're going to go phase of this government. The 20 to 40 billion pound black hole. What are they going to choose to fill it with? Send reform, special educational needs. How far are they going to go on that? Are they going to revisit welfare? Is there going to have to be more reform to the NHS? Exactly what does school reform look like? Delivery is once you've worked out where you're going, you've maybe passed the legislation and you're implementing it. We're nowhere near that for large parts of this government. So we're not in the delivery phase. That is just not right.
Okay, we'll call it a draw on that one. Let's look across the aisle before we finish, Sam. And Kemi Badenoch has her first big intervention of the new parliamentary term. If you discount beefing with Guardian journalists about her university applications. And I'm struck by the fact that the last time she was out and about on net zero, I happened to go to that speech. She said, I still accept net zero, but we should get there a lot more slowly in order to protect the economy at a vulnerable point. Well, this now looks like a complete reversal of the Tories' previous net zero policy. She is up in Scotland in the august company of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and she is going to talk about maximising extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea. So that doesn't sound like many ifs and buts in there. It's drill, baby, drill, isn't it, on the Tory side?
It is. What's interesting with Kemi Badenoch is she seems to be hardening positions. You're right about the journey on net zero. I also think there's been a journey on things like ECHR withdrawal from her position at the point of her winning the leadership to what I'd expect at conference time, which is complete withdrawal. So I think we are watching a hardening of her positions. It's going to be interesting to see how far that goes.
Phase 2 KB.
But I think we are not allowed into phase 3 because the alarm has gone off. So we're going to draw it to a close there. Thank you very much indeed for listening. And we will be back tomorrow for Wednesday's Politics at Sam and when we see Keir Starmer in the flesh with Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's Questions.
What's not to like? See you then.